All right, welcome back. All right, so today our gun talk is going to be about mainly recoil springs, different weights, which depending on your slide weight or your slide, and then also we'll get into just a little bit about guide rods as well. All right, so do me a favor, guys. Go ahead, grab your firearm, right, and grab your slide. All right. This is mainly going to be about you guys that have material removed off of your Glock 19 slides. All right. Um, and basically, if you got a lot of material removed, this is definitely going to be the video for you to tune into. But what you can do is, grab your firearm, just look at your slide. And it doesn't have to be, the same exact slide that I have here. You just want to look at how much material is taken off of there. All right. And then you can follow along in this video. All right, guys. So let's get into it. If you have a scale, that'll be even better. All right. This is a PSA SW5 slide. And I got this mainly because I like the look of the slide. It was very unique. All right. There's a lot of slides out there with a lot of window cuts and a lot of, material removed for weight savings and everything. But I really like the look of this slide, and there's no other slide, that looks like this slide. But there are a lot of other slides that have window cuts in them, and they pretty much look like each other, even though they're made by different manufacturers and stuff like that. But anyway, I'll get into that in a different video concerning my build and stuff like that. All right, so boom, we got the slide here. Let's go ahead and take this recoil spring out, this assembly, because a lot of you guys probably are going to have different type recoil springs and guide rods. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to weigh it without the guide rod and spring, but I'll leave the barrel in just in case, and then I'll take the barrel out so you can get an idea to reference as far as weight is concerned, right? So right now, with my slide in the barrel, this is a lone wolf, alpha wolf barrel, all right, with no recoil spring assembly, but all the other parts in there, all right? And guys, just remember, all right, as you can see, there's no optic here, all right? We're at 386 grams. And for ounces, that's going to be 13.62 ounces. All right, so almost 13 and a half ounces. All right, guys, so if you're somewhere in there, you can follow along pretty good with this video. And then let me take the barrel out so those of you can get an idea. All right, so 10.17 ounces without the barrel, without the recoil spring. And then basically that's going to be 288 grams. All right, guys. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now, basically, you could have a Glock where you just replace the slide, all right, which a lot of us do. And then you can have a true build, all right, or a build where you want it to go with a different slide and kind of match things up and do your own thing, right? But nevertheless, the more material that you have removed off of your slide, it's going to affect how the gun cycles, all right? And it's going to affect the recoil impulse. Okay, guys? Very important. All right? Well, you might say, well, why? A lot of guys, y'all will take, the slides that you bought, with a lot of cuts in it or a lot of shaving. Sometimes the slides don't have a lot of window cuts in it, but the way it's cut is beveled. They got all kind of ways of removing a lot of material, off these slides, right? So you'll get your build up and running, or you'll get your new slide on, and then you'll throw in the same recoil spring that you had, you know, on your stock setup, right? Which, if you have a newer firearm, newer Glock 19 or anything like that, they come with an 18-pound recoil spring assembly, all right, and a plastic guide rod. If you have one of the older ones from back in the day, you got a 17-pound recoil spring, all right, and that's if you bought it stock. Now, the difference that makes is, let's say you got your new slide, you know, you got a bunch of cuts in it, you get your gun back together, and you threw your 18-pound recoil spring in there. And then you're all excited, you're amped up, you know, you go get your stuff together, you go to the range, and then boom, you start shooting, and you have malfunctions, you have, you know, all type of situations going on. Well, if you're not running an optic, and then you throw 18-pound recoil spring in there, which is fairly new, it's not going to be broken in that much. Depending on what ammo you're shooting, that could be the reason that, let's say, your gun shot normally at first, no jams, no stovepipes, you know, double feet, none of that, no malfunctions, and then boom, all you did was change your slide, and you use the same recoil spring, and then boom, now you have all type of problems going on. Well, more than likely, it's going to be the weight of that old recoil spring. All right, you have to take in consideration that when you lighten this up, you're going to need a lighter recoil spring. And then let's say you put your stock recoil spring in there, the 18-pound, and then it works fine, but then the way the gun recoils feels horrible. You know, like it's too sharp. You feel a sharp sensation in your hand, because what happens is, with these type slides, they can only remove the weight at the forward part, the front part. They do remove a little weight back here, but who's going to walk around with their plate off? You know what I mean? If you got your cut for your optic, you throw a plate on, so that puts a little bit of weight back on in the back. All right. So think about what happens if the weight over the front of the gun, which keeps the gun balanced when you shoot, if you remove weight up here and you go to shoot, now the recoil impulse, all the weight is in the back, right? So now your gun is going to feel out of balance. All right. You have weight back here, the weight of the bullets in the magazine and all that kind of stuff. So now your gun is going to feel different from what you're used to. And then when you go to fire it, it's going to feel different as far as the recoil impulse, with a lot of your weight being back here, and especially if you have an optic on it. All right. So what do I prefer? Do I prefer stainless steel guide rods over plastic guide rods? Of course. All right, guys. Especially in this situation. In a stock gun, it doesn't really matter. All right. If you have a stock gun with the stock slide, it doesn't matter because the gun is balanced. So you don't need the weight of a stainless steel guide rod. The factory part works fine. All right. But in something like this, you need to get that weight back in the front. And how you pick up some more weight back in the front is either your stainless steel guide rod, you can go captured, or non-captured. All right, guys. So I prefer those to put a little bit of weight back in the front. Also, another thing to consider is grain of ammo that you're shooting. All right, that's going to factor in this, because basically the main thing you're trying to do is, one, you're trying to get your gun to cycle right and cycle properly. That's the main thing. But then two, after you get it cycling properly, you're just adjusting for the feel of it. All right. You want it to feel the best, the most comfortable, if there's such a thing, when you're practicing at the range. All right. You may get it cycling properly, but then it may feel like a sharp, stinging. That's what I can refer it to, like a sharp stinging sensation after you fire every round, you know, through your wrist. That means your recoil spring, the weight is too heavy. All right, guys. So I started with the 15, all right, which is the captured one. It has a flat wire spring on here. All right. Now, this 15 is great in the fact that if you're shooting 124 or 124 plus P, you're going to want to go with a 15 pound. All right. Now, does it have to be captured or non-captured? It really doesn't matter, because in both of those situations, you're going to have a stainless steel guide rod more than likely. All right. So the 15 pound spring was good for 124 and 124 plus P. That, it felt the best shooting that ammo. All right. When you shoot 115 grain with the 15 pound recoil spring, all right, those of you that's been shooting a lot, you'll know 115 actually feels like it has more recoil than a 124 or 124 plus P. All right, depending on the ammo. All right, sounds crazy, but a lot of you guys, you know, if you shoot a lot, you'll know that. All right, now with the 115 grain and the 15 pound recoil spring, the gun, let's see, how could I explain this? The gun climbs higher. All right, so when you reduce the weight of the recoil spring, your gun can cycle faster, but then the gun will climb higher, all right, as you shoot. And then when you start going heavier in the recoil spring weight, then it'll start flattening your recoil out more when you shoot. All right, so it's a balancing act. You're trying to get, you know, your gun to shoot as flat as possible, but to feel as comfortable as possible. So boom, 15 pound recoil spring. I wouldn't say 115 grain. All right. Can you do it? Yes. Now, if you mix it and match it and you do run 115 and you do shoot 124 or 127, and you may shoot 124 plus P or one, you know, whatever the case may be, right in that range, then that'll be a great spring for you. All right. But mainly because of the 124 to 127. All right. Now, I have a 16 here with the stainless steel guide rod. All right, 16 pound spring. And then I got a 17 pound spring. They both weigh the same and they both look the same, and I don't want to mix them up. So I have one in the bag. I got the 17 in the bag and the 16 on the guide rod. All right. Now, what I like about these setups, you can actually change this out in the range on the fly. All right. So when you're testing it out, boom, you can shoot a few rounds. Start with the lighter spring. All right. Let your gun cool off a little bit, and then boom, change it over to the 17 and then shoot. You know, all of this stuff you can test out. You know, feel free to try it, guys. You know, it doesn't cost a lot of money buying these guide rods and springs. So get you a few different setups, you know, and just see what you like. That's the only way you're going to know, you know, how it's going to work out with your ammo and with your setup. All right. So boom, with the 16, small end goes towards this part of your guide rod, the larger end, okay, over here. Now, the 16 was the best as far as shooting 115 grain. So if you primarily shoot 115 grain, or you shoot like 68 grain, 72 grain, plus P or not, you know, like that hot ammo, then 16 is going to be the best feel. All right. And that's the best balance between the gun shooting flatter. All right. And also how the recoil impulse feels as it travels through your hand, your wrist, all right, up your arm into your shoulder. You know what I mean? 124, 127 plus P and no plus P, you can do it. All right. It just feels a little bit sharper. All right. When you try to shoot those grain weights. All right. You got to focus a lot more when you're holding the pistol. Okay, you gotta have a tight grip, and this is for, you know, accuracy. All right, if you want to be really accurate, you gotta have a tighter grip on the gun, and you have to think about it a lot more with this 16-pound weight recoil spring versus the 15-pound. All right, as far as 127 and 124 grain. I don't shoot much of 147, so, you know, I'm not even touching on that. I haven't even tested none of this stuff out with 147 grain ammo. All right, guys. Now, another thing that I can say about this test, you do want to make sure all your springs are broken in. All right. So you might be like, well, dang, how do I break them in if I'm not at the range and I just bought the new spring and I want to go test it out? Because that will play a part in the sensation that you feel when you shoot these firearms, right? So boom, put your new spring in. All right. Put your gun back together. Lock your slide back for 8 hours overnight, you know, or 4 hours at a time, you know, or whatever the case, whatever you feel comfortable with. All right. It doesn't hurt to lock your slide back for 8 or 10 hours. That's equivalent to shooting, you know, hundreds and hundreds of rounds at the range. All right. Do some dry firing, cycle the slide, you know, all that kind of stuff in combination with leaving it locked back. And that's how you can break it in. All right, guys. So that's a quick little tip right there. But yeah, if you're going to go, like I said, 115 grain, and then that hot 68 and 72 and, you know, those type grain weights, 16 is going to be the best. All right. Now, when it comes to this 17, with this much weight cut out of the slide, I didn't like it shooting any 115 or below. All right. And then I didn't like it shooting any 124 or 127. All right. Reason being, you're back to the older Gen 3s and Gen 2s, you know, factory spring weight in a 17-pound recoil spring. Well, what's the problem? Well, we got a lot of material cut out. All right. Our barrel is only so much weight. The stainless steel guy rod is only so much weight. All right. And in terms of the balance of the gun, unless you don't have it fully loaded, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't feel balanced. All right. As the rounds are being shot out, then you kind of feel more of a balance between the front and the rear of the gun. Right. And of course, this is if you don't have any lights on your firearm to add weight on the front of the gun, things of that nature. But even with a light on the front, it adds a little bit of weight, but the recoil impulse, all right, the light is not reciprocating mass. The light just is stationary on the rail. All right. But if you have an optic, most optics are between, you know, 1 and 2 ounces. All right. So that'll change it up a little bit, but not really. And just to give you guys an example, this guide rod and recoil spring is almost 28 ounces. I'm sorry, 28 grams. My bad. So that's 1 ounce. All right. So I meant to say 1 ounce. So 1 ounce is not much in terms of weight, but when it goes on the back of a slide, all right, and your slide is already back heavy, then it does affect the feel of it. All right. But in terms of your recoil springs, 1 ounce is not going to make too much of a difference. All right. In the feel. So even if you do have an optic on the back, you can still pretty much follow these guidelines as far as these recoil springs are concerned. All right. But yeah, with the 17, it didn't feel comfortable shooting 124, 127, or 115. All right, guys. So just wanted to share my experience with that with you. I know it'll help a lot of you guys as far as, you know, what you want to buy and what you want to put in your firearm. But the 17 was a little bit, 17-pound recoil spring was just a little bit too much. All right. Now, if you're shooting, you know, plus P plus, which you would have to have an aftermarket barrel to do so, or if you're shooting heavyweight, just 147, you know, stuff like that, or those type of loads, then you may be able to get away with the 17. I haven't tried it, but you may be able to get away with it. So I just recommend, guys, buy a bunch of different springs. If you can, do the non-captured guide rod. That way you can change them out as you're at the range, just be careful where you place them and don't let it fly across the range or out there where the target is. You'll never get it back. All right. But buy a couple of those setups, try them out, chime back in the comments which situation or which setup is the best for you with your slide. All right. And then guys, if you have a slide and let's say you only have like one little small window cut and they haven't beveled a lot of it and taken a lot of material off, then you may want to go down an additional pound versus what I mentioned here. All right. Now, if you got a heavy optic on, let's say your optic is 2 ounces, then that's gonna pretty much put you back to a heavier weight on your slide. You see what I'm saying? So you got to determine the weight of everything and then go from there. All right. But just buy different springs, different setups, and then try it out. Comment below what your best setup is with your recoil spring and or your guide rod. All right. I know some of you guys like tungsten and some of those heavier guide rods. All right, guys. Talk to you later.